The tuition is more credit. Yeah.
Thank you, Bill.
Hi, David.
Hey, Daryl.
Hear me okay?
Oh, okay, bro. Everyone's got food.
I was kind of sprawled.
You want to kick things off?
Yeah, it's a little after 12, so we can start now if everyone's ready. All good? Sorry, the Zoom for me, I had my eyes dilated about 2 hours ago, so I can't drive, so bring me home, and sorry about that, but this is good. Hopefully this will work out okay. Okay, start the meeting. We'll start with introductions. And Robert, want to start with you on the end there? Or?
Oh, we have one more sitting here.
Oh,
That you probably can't see. Yeah.
Can't see them. Okay.
Hello,
There.
I'm Jillian
With Ian?
Weiser. I'm Jillian Weiser. I'm with Health Services as the compliance officer, and I'm just sitting in by invitation of David Gibbons today to learn and absorb a little bit.
Excellent. Well, welcome.
And good afternoon. I'm Robert Tintel, Chief Financial Officer at Shoots.
Hello, I'm Whitney Hale, Deputy County Administrator.
Welcome.
And I'm Bill Kennedy, Shoots County Treasurer.
Janet Kane, Accounting Manager in Finance.
Kathleen Hinman, HR Director.
Steve Gunnels, District Attorney.
Heidi Darrow, District County Commissioner.
Joe Healy, Public Member.
Scott Wright, Public Member.
Jody Birch, Public Member.
Aaron Kay, Performance Auditor.
Dave Givens, County Internal Auditor.
Lee Rendell, County Member of Facilities Department.
Nick Leland, County Administrator.
Summer Sears, I'm a public member.
Angie Powers, Administrative Assistant.
Yeah, I guess that's it, right, Daryl? Oh, Daryl Parrish, public member. Steve and Bill, welcome and congratulations to both of you.
Thank you.
Okay, let's get started.
Could I add one more?
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. Okay, go ahead.
Jessica Chandler is on the Zoom.
Oh, I see your name. Okay,
Oh, yes, thank you.
great. Hi, Jessica. Okay, so let's get started with the bulk of the meeting. The first thing we'll do is submit the agenda, or I'm sorry, the minutes from the 1/24/2023 meeting for approval. Anything that from the minutes, do we have a motion to approve? Any additions, sections, comments?
I'll move to approve.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the minutes from 1/24. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, let's move on. Any additions to the agenda, David? Anything to add?
Not really, no, I'm good.
All right, excellent. Okay, so the first item then on today's meeting is the popular annual financial report. Robert?
Can you share it first?
Yeah, we're going to turn that over to Janet Kane, our accounting manager, to speak to that.
Okay, great.
Right. So anybody that was here last for the audit committee meeting last time, they presented our annual comprehensive financial report, 300 pages, a lot to digest. So we as a county do this popular annual financial report. It's a 6-page summary of this massive book we put together. If you go the first, sure. Pretty picture. So this little table of contents explains what the ACFR or the PAFR is. This is not audited. Auditors don't look at this at all, but it is tied out by me and my team to the ACFR. The first few pages of the PAFR are actually summarized from the government-wide statements in the ACFR. So we run through net position. We present it all a little bit differently here, so it's more digestible to like somebody that may not be as financially savvy or doesn't care about the 80 categories of assets that we have. So the first page, net position, breaks out, this chart's breaking out capital assets and all other assets. You can see that capital assets makes up the majority of our assets. other assets, AR, cash, inventory, loans that we've given people. And then we have a comparison down here comparing it per capita. I think it's interesting that net position matches inflation right now. So if you look at the last 13 years of inflation, we've actually increased our net position at the exact same rate. On to the next page. So high level summary of assets and liabilities. Same situation. You look at the ag for, we've got like 15 categories of assets and 15 categories of liabilities. Much more summarized on for everybody. Same thing, bringing out cash and investments, 48%, capital assets, 37%. And then over here, liabilities. We have been discussing adding more information about PERS liability in the future, since that's one of our largest liabilities. So if anybody has any ideas, totally open and receptive. To bring it out, if you tie this back to the actor, it would tie to a T. The next page, same thing, coming from our government-wide statements, revenues and expenses, breaking it out into high-level areas that people will actually understand. So taxes is the largest one, charges for services, and then grants. And then you'll see our unrealized investment loss this year. That was rough. That's just an awkward to put through the financials. Same thing with expenses. This one, we break it out more by like key service areas or largest service areas. So you see health, general government, county roads, solid waste. One thing to note, we did move the DA's office, victims assistance into public safety this year to align with other big, large Oregon counties that had it listed there and not under general government. So if you're looking at last year's, that might be a difference to see. This page is kind of my favorite. We stole it from City of Bend a few years ago, but breaks out where your tax dollars are going. Yeah, and so here, this other public safety, because 911 and Sheriff's Office have their own taxing districts, we kept those separate. And then other public safety would be in our general county taxing district. Any questions so far? No, I'm probably too fast. Okay. And then just some trends for people to see. So revenues and expenses, 10-year history. I feel like the statistics section of the ACFR is people's favorite section. And it's the Oregon audit section. So we put it in the PAFR here too, because people like to see where we've gone over the last 10 years and how much our revenues and expenditures have grown. Same thing, it's trending by those same key areas you saw on the prior pages: taxes, grants, charges for services. You can see grants has gone up drastically. Thank you, health. Expenses, 10-year histories by like key areas. So kind of see they're flowing. And then one of our largest liabilities, debt. So a breakdown of debt, we go through this. And then the main debt, the largest ones and what they represent. And then a 10-year history of debt. And we take credit for our awesome AA1 rating. And then you can see that our capita debt's going down, which might change soon. And then we've got an overview of property taxes. I think this is something that residents are very interested in. So we go over the 5 different tax levies we have here at the county that are all consolidated into the financial statements. You will hear like 911, that's a separate legal entity. It is, but we have the same board that makes all their decisions, so they do have to be consolidated with us. 10-year history of tax rates, 10-year history of assessed value. So just some like, I think it's just more interesting information than what our ACFR says. So, and I do believe all this information is in the ACFR. It might just be more in like a narrative format that you have to read pages instead of seeing pretty charts. think this is the last, yeah, it's kind of the last page of some graphics. So just running through the demographics for the county, so population, median age, unemployment rate, and then population per full-time employee. I think if you ever have somebody ask you about county finances, this is like a great resource to point them to so that they don't have to try to adjust the school.
And is the website the best place for them to find it?
Yes. You can Google Dutchess County PAFR and it'll come up too. And then we did put it on social media everywhere we could. We're trying to get more exposure to this. So, and then we dropped off a bunch of copies at the library. So just trying it, chamber, a bunch of places. And then these are just disclosures we're required to do for PAFR to receive the award. So this is probably the one page the residents don't care about, but it's there. And then we did get the award for 2021, so we got to put it in there. And the replies for 2022.
This is probably the fourth PAFR you've done.
Or
Yeah, I think it's around four.
if we Google Dutchess County PAFR, you'll see them.
Yeah.
I know we're on our, well, awards and preparing are a different thing too, so that's,
So the second year we've done this.
no, it's like the fourth or
Oh,
fifth.
for
Mhm. And then, so we have our budget book that we get the award for, and then the act where we get the award for, and so GFOA, Government Finance Officers Association, has what's called a triple crown, where you can get the budget book, the actor, and the PAFR. And so we could probably say that we're triple crown awards.
Do you guys do any kind of press release for that?
Yes.
Good.
Everybody?
And we also, GFOA sends actual crowns, fun fact for the triple crown. Plays pretty well on social.
There's one in my office that whoever to
Were you wearing it?
I wasn't on the team that got the triple crown because they're usually like a year behind, and so they made them all wear it for the picture with the commissioners. And I was like, how do I get out of that next year?
Yeah, I really like this report. I think it's really useful for the non-governmental, just the resident who's out there and wants to know about the county's finances, but doesn't want to look at the ACFR, which is way too much information for most people. So I really like this report. I think it's really well laid out and very useful for people. I think it's great.
I just have a question about the graph on the bottom of page 9, the population per full-time employees. And I see it's begun to decrease. So question, is that because our staffing hasn't kept up with the population growth, or because it's capturing all FTE, or is it just capturing just actual FTE? Because we were running about a 10% vacancy rate. I'm just curious about if we know the information about the population per FTE.
It would be on approved FTE,
Okay.
not filled positions.
Okay.
Sure.
A few openings.
So speaking to this document, I'll just let you guys know, I work with several different local governments within the state, and the county and the city of Bend are two of the places that other organizations look to get templates and ideas and best practices from. So, John, keep it up.
Yeah, great. It's really a great report. Any comments, questions, or thoughts? Okay, hearing none. Why don't we move on to the next item, which is the internal audit report, treasurer transition. Hey, Bill.
Sure, 1 second, I transition as I was. My distance classes and my test classes.
All
don't know if you see what I'm saying. All right. Still seeing that, Daryl? Daryl?
Yes, I see it. Sorry, I was on mute. Yeah, let's go.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
So treasurer transition, as many of you are aware, we've been doing transition reports for many years as kind of one of the things to prepare offices for new officers that come in through the process of elections. And we haven't done it for department heads, but we've done it for electeds in particular. So the interesting thing is this transition and this particular audit went through a lot of time, because one of the things that happened is we had kind of an unusual shift over the last, I think, 27 years. We've had a CFO and a treasurer that are combined, and then this year our election brought us a person who's not our CFO. So again, we had a little bit of a delay as I kind of worked through some additions to the report to kind of take and address some of the differences that we were going to be seeing coming into having a newly elected officer. So treasurer's duties, of course, if you've gone through the report, talks about all the many duties the treasurer has from statute. Talks a little bit about some of the increasing levels of monies the county has, investments, and then the recommendations. I mean, part of the first section of the report really kind of delves into how the county needs to kind of regroup and rejigger itself to kind of help pave the way for Bill's office, and trying to clarify and connect all the different duties and responsibilities with our organization. So again, four main recommendations in that line, and then some other ones that are kind of smaller items to talk about the investment policy. One of them, we talked to the investment advisory committee. That was earlier this week. This week's flown by. So yeah, we talked about that. They're on board. So again, all these things were discussed and working towards that. And Robert and Bill have been both very conscientious in terms of responding to my inquiries and trying to work through this report process. I appreciate that very much. I don't know if Robert or Bill have any comments or thoughts, or how the audit go from their perspective. Is it useful?
Yeah,
Anything
I'll,
that you can add is good.
Hey, David, I'll respond. I thought the audit was very timely. Honestly, me moving into a new role, a role that had not been maybe clearly defined internally. It's been so long since we've actually been in a position where we've had this kind of dual role. And so it's helpful for me. And certainly I think it clarified a few things in my mind in terms of areas that we need to focus on. And I kind of joked that I think I found out that we were having an audit on my second or third day, and I'm going, wait a minute, I've been here long enough to be audited. But in reality, it was very, very timely and good discussion. David and I had a couple of really good discussions around, some of the areas of focus and certainly opportunities that we have in front of us. So I thought it was very helpful.
Yeah, the audit report pointed out some good things we need as far as documentation, making sure, and we have good internal controls, but let's just get those written on paper. Those were some continuing recommendations, but we set a timeline for each of the recommendations. So we're going to be responding to those. We already have staff working on the documentation on internal controls for that piece. And so now the next phase will be really the important one too, clarifying the roles and responsibilities and distinction between the two positions. And so we'll be getting that documented as well, and then going before the board to name an investment officer. So those are great recommendations, and we both agree with them. So it's great to have this outside perspective and look at what's going on in that role.
Any questions from the audit committee or any of the other management?
Anything?
Is there a copy of the investment policy that's online?
I believe.
Yes.
Is it
Oh, I don't know.
online?
Is it external? Yeah, I
I can
know
get it
it's
to you.
internal.
Yeah, I would say it is online.
It is.
It is. Investment policy.
Okay.
Yeah, go into finance. kind of look at it out.
Good.
Let me know if you have trouble finding. I'll detail you.
Well, I'll just say, as the former treasurer.
They're in the
Yeah,
bag.
wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah. What was your most,
Haven't gone through
which
this.
investment do you remember the most?
Yeah.
You know what I remember the most was beginning this audit. But that was really good. My point was how informative this was, because we hadn't gone through this and we didn't know. I really didn't have to worry about the duties because thanks to our legal counsel, I was able to hand those over to Wayne Lowry, who continued to carry those forward for us until Bill was sworn in himself. But really, it was a really interesting process just to understand. So what is the evolution of this position? How did, what do other counties do? It was just a really great process. And Dan, you really did a great job, and just the internal discussions we had were really informative and just trying to understand it. And I know we're still in process, so and it's going to be, we're just a few months in, but I think we're in a really good place. Thank you.
That's probably a great point that you mentioned too, about what do counties do? And that's, as Bill has learned, and as you know, through this process, we all learn, each county is different as well. Whether it's appointed treasurer, elected treasurer, each county, you know, they keep saying, if you've been to one county, you've seen, you know, if you've seen one county, you've been to one county, right? So, they're all set up differently. And so, because each county is organized and structurally different. And so that's where we'll be owning in a custom role and responsibility that works best for our organization.
Yeah, I have to say, you know, not all of course, the work I did shows up in the report, but part of it was talking to some of the other counties, and I just have to applaud Bill. I mean, from what I've heard from other counties, we have a very collaborative treasurer. We have a very collaborative finance department. It's not always so around the state. It's very nice to see that we can get together and we can kind of figure out what's right for everybody, as opposed to there's some major disagreements going on in the state over duties. And so, yeah, it's really cool. So anyhow, I'd add that. So,
I think that's really good perspective to realize that, you know, that tension can exist. And I think we're in a very good situation right now. But I think taking the time to identify where there are some gaps, where there aren't as clear definitions as there could be, really making sure we do that now, so that to the extent there are any of those tensions or responsibilities or priorities, that we've got that nice framework to be able to have the guardrails for the conversation about, all right, how do we resolve any of those questions that may come up? So I think this is great timing. And yeah, I think that the transition audits are always really valuable in this circumstance. I think particularly so with the change in the role.
question?
Good. Any questions? Anything else? Okay, let's move on to the next item. The elected district attorney transition report. Aaron and Steve, I guess.
Well, Dave has better eyes than I do and he's clicking through. I'll just kind of start the intro then. So this was an audit again. It wasn't on our initial work plan going in, but when John Hummel announced that he wasn't going to seek re-election in August of 21 for the term that started here just this January, kind of made its way on as part of, like David said, just a standard procedure here at the county to do any transition audits of elected officials. Steve won election in May of 2022 and was just sworn in here January 3rd. Because of the fact that Steve has been with the office over there for so long, and the relationship that him and John established, everything over there was amicable and collaborative. as well. Again, another reflection of just kind of some of the great things here in Deschutes County that maybe not, well, we've seen the DA transitions in the past not be quite so friendly and not quite such a clean handoff. So we, again, have a unique environment here set up for this transition audit. Yeah, so just a little bit of budgetary background for the office. The graph that I did showed kind of both just the increase in FTE over the recent history, and then the commensurate growth in the budget. Because their labor costs are basically the majority of their budgeted costs. I like to use those. Yeah. So we came up with 5 recommendations. Before I get into those, I did make a little bit of a note in the audit report, just a small paragraph referring to some of the follow-up work that we had done on the consultants' work for the Prosecutors Center for Excellence that John Humble had started, and talked to Steve a little bit about it during this transition, and Stephen alluded that he's going to continue some of those work towards finishing those recommendations. So I don't think we as an office will do any more follow-up work on that, but he's going to continue carrying that ball forward. So I just thought it would be a good thing to note on the side. So as far as recommendations, just documentation of the transition. These are always kind of key things that basically activities that someone does on a day-to-day basis. They're fairly routine, but maybe unknown to someone coming into that role. You know, it could be not just duties and responsibilities, but you know, what projects are going on currently? What are some of the things that are upcoming? You know, great, you know, contacts that you frequently interact with, passwords to various systems or applications. Always good things just to have kind of written down as that transition is happening, so that it's as seamless as possible. I think Steve did a great thing with kind of forwarding John's email just automatically over his inbox as kind of a way to just capture anything that maybe had slipped through the cracks, just to kind of continue that communication. I thought was a very, very innovative way to kind of close that gap. It's really pretty neat. Use of county purchasing agreements. Again, previous to John, Patrick Flaherty had kind of separated the DA staff, IT staff away from the county. The impacts of that are still kind of a little bit felt. They've done a lot through John's tenure to rebuild that relationship and use a lot more of the county infrastructure for those IT roles. But this is one of the holes that are kind of found through the course of the audit, where they're still buying a lot of equipment, but not necessarily using the purchasing agreements in place that the county's established with Dell to leverage that relationship, that efficiency. So instead of having to troubleshoot, you know, one single product and know that brand really well inside and out, you know, they're, you know, maybe having to deal with, you know, several brands that have common failure points and trying to troubleshoot those. So a little bit of an efficiency as well as a cost savings. So part of transitional audits, or any of them, has a little bit of a abbreviated look, is what I like to call it, about fiscal procedures. It's not a full-on cash handling audit by any stretch, but we just kind of kick the tires on fiscal controls. And one of the things that I noticed right off the bat is they're still doing a lot of manual receipting for discovery fees that are coming in over the counter or through the mail. So using Munis can help close some of the control gaps, and I would argue that it's actually faster than writing a manual receipt, and it provides a lot more automation on the back end that you do the reconciliation a lot easier and faster and do the balancing. The urgency to do those daily deposits that also were maybe lacking behind a little bit. And then the last one, so in January of 22, the ORS that governs Office of District Attorneys for all of Oregon was amended to, they expanded it to have publicly available written policies and procedures for every district attorney's office in a number of areas. You could probably expand on that, Steve, a little better than I can to recall, but it's my memory is failing me. Can you help me out here, Steve? What all?
Yeah, having policies in particular categories in particular need to be available and publicly accessible. And so we have done that part, but we weren't updated. I would just say Aaron was great to work with, and having the audit was actually a big benefit to us because first of all, he pointed out that we needed to update our policy manual, which is a good thing to tell lawyers. We're not following law. And none of us got mad about that, we just did it.
Yeah.
And so now it's updated. He also gave us a deadline to work to, which was today. And so it's updated, the policy manual is updated now, I think we're good.
Yeah.
And it just needs to be available, and it is.
What were some of the subject areas of all those policies that had to be included in there within the ORS? It was a lot of decision making, I think.
Yeah, it has to do with programs, if it's admission to programs, it has to do with discovery fees,
Right.
things like that we deal with on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. Yeah.
That are important to us and should be documented because they are policies in our office.
So like Steve mentioned, we agreed to some quick deadlines for a lot of that stuff, and it just sent me this week these new policies and procedures that'll be reflected in the work plan going forward for any kind of follow-up audit activity. And my main takeaway from the audit was, again, the fact, this unique opportunity we had due to Steve's tenure, due to the relationship that he and John had established, the near seamless transition. I mean, it was the best possible scenario. David kind of gave me his experience on the clerks transition between Nancy Blankenship and Steve Dennison in a similar fashion, where it was a long tenured employee taking the reins, and this great handoff and great collaboration. So again, I think Steve should be commended for taking over, and him and John should both be commended for such a smooth transition.
Yeah, it was smooth. I've been through bad transitions at the DA's office, and I've been through 2 bad transitions. This wasn't one. But having the audit really helped us to focus on the things that he needed to tell me about his job, the job he had been doing, that I am not exposed to. I've been the chief deputy over there, which is like second in command, for 20 years, but I haven't been doing the DA job, and they're very different. And so this gave us an opportunity to discuss the differences and the other demands on time in particular of the DA. And so that was actually a really big benefit to me when I started, that I kind of knew what to expect. And so I just want to reiterate, the audit is a good thing.
Thank you. Yeah. Any other questions or comments from the committee?
I just think from the outside looking in, looking at the response, the recommendations on this report and also on the last one, you can see the collaboration there. Just see that it's working really well, and that the audit and the departments are working together really well to address this stuff, and they see it as a positive rather than a burden. So I think we appreciate that. Those of us on the outside looking in.
And to Daryl's point, we see a lot of that at the executive management and management level. How are your staff doing with acceptance of the new procedures? Are they super excited?
It's self-serving to say they're doing really well. They're excited.
Good.
They're happy
Okay, good.
so far.
That you know of, they say to your face.
That I know, to my face, yeah.
Right. Fair enough, thanks.
Okay, anything else on the DA transition? Okay, let's move on to the next one, personal information data privacy.
Bear with me while I swap. All right, so this particular audit was conceived on the idea of just kind of checking where we stand in terms of data privacy. Such a big topic these days in terms of protecting it. It kind of balances between paper stuff and computerized stuff quite a bit. And so this kind of blended both and looked at paper and computer equally. What were departments doing? So it kind of went across all lines to see where we're going. And again, the PI definition or the personal information definition was from the state identity theft Information Protection Act, and now it's called. And that dovetails with our policy at the county. So the typical things that you think of, basically things that would identify a person through their first name, last name, social security number, driver's license, passport. We only had a couple like biometric, credit card type things, very little of that, mostly with social security numbers, driver's license, we're crediting. And then of course we have departments that have a significant amount of medical and mental health history, so.
I just want to share my personal thrilling moment this week. I got my paper statement for my political account and it had been hacked from a French jewelry company on go figure, on Valentine's Day, and they just little amounts, but I was like so upset, like I'm going, okay. And then I didn't even recognize that the second page, they reversed them all, but then were they gonna come back for a bigger transaction? And I had been hacked once years ago, and that took me like an hour to fill out all the federal forms when your accounts have been hacked. So just want everyone to know that you do kind of need to look at your account. I mean, this was my monthly statement, and thank goodness I did look at it. But yeah, so no one was buying me jewelry from France. Can you imagine that?
So again, the assessment kind of, I used some tools from a federal level in terms of looking at assessments. Included a number of topics that were included in addition to the ones that are kind of part of the information, the Oregon Information Act. So I mean, basically kind of walking through, identification of where it's being collected, why are we collecting it, how are we accessing and using it, how do we share and transfer it? Again, all the kind of from cradle to grave, kind of what's going on with our information. Providing consent or declination of rights, disclosure of data, that happens probably more frequently with our like HIPAA or significantly protected information. Storage and disposal of data, again, one of the cool things I found out, county has transitioned to Microsoft 365 fairly recently. And the county has the highest level, I believe, of protection in that cloud environment. So there's multiple levels, and we have the strongest level, which is strong enough for law enforcement to be happy with it. So it's pretty cool that, when we have email and it's running through that system, we have significant security going on with that. So found that really interesting. Privacy analysis being formed. Again, you see audits we do, we a lot of times will deal with private information. Departments to some extent do that same stuff, but I'd say probably to a lesser extent. HR, of course, has quite their hand in quite a bit of private data. So there's it runs the gamut, and then looking at and asking about how they maintain that, where they keep it, keeping it safe. So again, one of the things I thought was interesting was this graph I kind of came up with was the extent of departments that had, and these were the kind of the key areas, different privacy information. And, as you can imagine, law enforcement has a significant amount of data, plus had a significantly higher, they have a higher kind of threshold of protection and whole set of different processes. So between law enforcement and like health, you'll see those dark blue spots. That's where those are. They have significant controls higher than what's required by policy. But they're required by, CGIS and their specific law enforcement and or state practices. So all the other departments will have a dot or two around them. There was only one small department, property management, which has only 2 people in it. It's only one that didn't handle anything that was sensitive from this assessment. So I thought that was pretty interesting. So again, we went through each assessment tables for like different parts of it. So controls over oversight. And then one of the things that I did is I kind of gave them kind of a compliance status, are we compliant or not? And then basically are we, did I suggest any recommendations in that area? So again, all of these you'll find are compliant. They're just a matter of whether I had some kind of observational suggestions in there with them. So, so Oregon Consumer Protection Act had a number of safeguards required. We're compliant with all those. And then we came up with, I think it's only four recommendations. And again, part of it is being aware of what the PI statute is and the policy is. So that there was one overriding recommendation to just make our staff more aware of what the practices are, what the policy is and all that stuff. Having some training, having periodic training, identify a privacy kind of a lead or officer and all that kind of stuff was helpful. Technology has changed so much and we're all embracing new technology in a number of different departments in a number of different ways. And just being aware of how we share data, what tools and how we do it. I mean, I was on the phone a lot with IT trying to get primers on, okay, is this appropriate or is this appropriate? Can they do this? Can they do that? What's the best practice? So again, I think if I'm doing that, I can only imagine the troubles some staff have with figuring out what the best ways to do things. Again, retention, it's always a difficult thing. County has a lot of data in places, so are we retaining or following our retention practices? And should we be centralizing it more? That kind of stuff. And then county policy. So does our policy at the end of the day reflect all the things we want to do? And I was talking to Eric quite a bit about, I think he's the one who originally wrote this policy a long time ago. But, so the things that we might do to improve it and try to update it to reflect the new things. But Eric, do you have any further comments on this? I think that's the last of the
Yes,
questions.
since I missed the beginning of the meeting, I'm Eric Kropp, Deputy County Administrator, and I'm also the county's risk manager. I'd like to thank David for the audit. When he started to scope it and start the discussions, I didn't know what he was going to find out. And I really appreciate that he developed tools to figure out how to assess the organization. Because that's a big lift in itself. I was very pleased that the audit found that county employees had a strong grasp of data privacy and departments doing a good job of protecting the data. And the audit also had some very good recommendations on how we even improve that. We'll start with updating that policy, the GA9, and then once we update the policy, then we'll work with departments to implement. And what you'll find from departments is some departments have several staff that work on these things and have great practices. David mentioned health services. Jillian's here from the compliance team, and they do a fantastic job of understanding the data, protecting it. And then we have other departments where kind of that staff liaison might be somebody who this is just a piece of their job. They don't quite have that understanding. But what it'll allow us to do is to update the policy, learn from the departments that are doing a great job, and then share those best practices with the other departments. we found that same approach effective with the cell phone audit, where we had a handful of departments that had great policies and procedures on managing their cell phones. And then a couple departments that didn't, and so we're able to share that information across the county. And the last thing is just helpful to have it as an audit recommendation. It's easier to go to departments and say, all right, we have to do this because we need to implement an audit recommendation versus we need to do this to, for good business practices or to minimize our risks. It's a little bit easier to implement audit recommendations. So I just appreciate the work that David did on that.
Are there like scheduled trainings on a routine basis for not just this, but cybersecurity, they all kind of go hand in hand as far as don't click on this and this is what private information is, this is what, because technology does change so fast and with the phones and all those things. So I didn't know if there was.
Want to talk about that before?
Yeah, IT contracts with a service that does a couple different things. Some of it's training based, another is kind of they'll send out sort of tests to gauge kind of where employees are at in terms of are they recognizing phishing attempts and things like that when they're being served up. And then based on employees' success rate with how they do on those emails, there's required training that follows. So if you're kind of in the clear, you're good to go. And if not, we have some supports. And I think, they've gotten pretty tricky, staff has, in terms of making the attempts look pretty legitimate. So that's on the cybersecurity side, some of what we do with that. So, but in terms of training that's specific to data privacy, I don't think we're there yet. And that's some of what Eric and I have talked about in terms of when we meet with departments that are doing this really well, looking at models that we can implement with other departments, and a component of that could be training. So it's something that's on our radar.
It's amazing with just walking past people's desks, what sometimes is sitting there unknowingly, unwittingly, or just not on purpose, that you can see just in a small organization that we're in.
So sometimes if I walk by one of my teammates' desks and it's not locked, I'll change their screensaver. So then I know they've been caught. Yeah, so it's just a practice anyone can implement if you feel appropriate. But yeah.
I will share a personal example. Steve Dennison, our county clerk, and myself were involved in a situation a couple weeks ago where it was an apparent phishing attempt. And Steve had sent an email to my personal email address requesting a transfer. And the whole thing, coming out of the banking industry, the whole thing just smelled like, a bad deal. And anyway, I contacted Steve directly. I said, Steve, I just wanted to let you know this is going on. It was apparent that maybe they tracked down personal email addresses through the recent election. And we're just throwing it out there to see what might happen. And we got IT involved, but I will say the training probably is something that we probably can't do enough training internally. I mean, it's one of those things where there are so many scams out there and we cannot afford the reputation risk associated with the data breach. It just, anyway, it's an area that is, again, coming out of the banking industry, it was a huge focus for us. And so whatever we do in that regard, I know we have a third-party firm that we contract with, but we need to be continually vigilant. And our employees do as well, because they're very creative about how they try to get into our system, so.
Yes, they are creative, aren't they? I love the test emails, so. Let's hope I'm paying attention that day.
David, I saw in this report, just like so many others, you almost have like a copy paste disclosure around compliance with statutes, right? And like new acts and ensuring policies are constantly updated to comply with recent, laws. How can the county help? I mean, things change so fast, right? Without a 5-year audit going and figuring out, oh, now it's not compliant. Is there a way to be a little more proactive on that, or find out when a policy has changed or a law has changed and then a underlying policy needs to change too?
Possibly. I mean, it's always a matter of trying to get these things more on the radar so that they're more actively assigned and used. And so like if we, through this process, do more routine training, then we'll more likely review the material, and then we'll review the statute and see if there's something else. So, I mean, it all helps. I mean, I think our law enforcement and our health people, they do annual training for HIPAA and for CGIS and for all the criminal law systems. They're at a much higher standard, so they're doing that training all the time. It's some of the other departments that, you know, maybe they hold a driver's license, and that's it, you know, so, you know, have they had training and all that stuff? Probably not. You know, they're being smart with it, but they're, you know, have they had training? No.
Well, it's interesting too, some of that training goes out to departments where you might not expect it. So our custodians go through CGIS training. And so they're getting that and just to be in the building, as well as actually everyone in the facilities department. So if you're provided access to any law enforcement building, the same kind of, probably not the level that a district attorney would have, but there's a basic requirement that our staff undergo annually. Actually, it might be every 2 years. I think it's a 2-year certification. So.
So I have a question, I think relating to recommendation 3 about potentially reducing the amount of personal information. And I say I think because I presume that is maybe referring to that high percentage of staff that are handling or have access to personal information, 99% of the county staff. Is there a feel either from the audit or from any of the department heads as far as, do we have, is it obvious that there is a certain group of staff that just don't need to be having that information, that it could be culled and change policy going forward? And also, is there a target? Do we feel that, gosh, if 99% now, we could probably get that down to 50%, or is 90% more likely? Is there any indication on what we should be expecting or aiming for in that regard?
Well, the 99% relates to the departments. So,
okay.
Granted, within a department, you might not have everyone who has access to same level of information.
Okay.
It might be like in road department, there's only one person handling the driver's licenses and all that information. So big department, but only one person. Health services, on the other hand, almost every person might touch something that's privileged or sensitive. And same thing with law enforcement. You know, those departments have a lot of connectivity. Finance, you know, it's blurred lines sometimes what they have that's sensitive or not sensitive, but they have, you know, social security numbers, they have access to a lot of things. So again, I think it's being mindful of all that. I think we go down to most of our systems are as on a need to know basis. They're all kind of privileged and scaled to need to know. And then paper documents, again, need to know. I mean, for those departments that still have some of the paper documents for, oh, I don't know, maybe they have an old employee application that has something on it, like a social security number or something. Yeah, they're being mindful. There's only probably a handful of people when it's locked in the cabinet and hasn't been looked at in 10 years. They need to send it to HR for more general keeping or destroy it. So I think it varies, but again, most departments are being really built in about managing who has access to what.
Especially once it gets in the system, I feel we have it very restricted. So like vendors, it's very restricted once their banking information gets added. There's only a few people that have access to that. But yeah, the paper left around.
Yeah, I mean, to kind of piggyback on that, actually, here's an example of one of the things that we saw and we hope to do more of, right? Is that departments, we found that they had a need or interest or want to have employee contact information for emergency situations and things like that. And we are happy to be that person who reaches out to the folks to have that contact. But what we found is that there were just lists created, right? So one of the things we did is that we said manager level can have access to demographics in the Munis system. But that's locked down then by, you only access it with your role, right? Your security role. So the idea was that you get rid of your lists because you now have access in a safe and secure manner to access that information. So what we're looking for are those opportunities. I think another really big opportunity is if we are able to move to paperless employee files, because I think that there's some duplication of departments just for ease of access, right? It's easier to keep a duplicate file here so I don't have to go downtown or ask them to scan something to me or send something like that. that is a component that we are looking to implement with Munis. But there are some security features, upgrades, programs is above my, outside of my expertise with IT, that I understand that we need to have completed within Munis before we can go through that process. But when there's opportunity, we do look for it to exchange kind of that paper for the secure role.
That's great to hear. I mean, of course, digital files have their own risks,
It's true.
but it's kind of a more compartmented risk than.
It's something we can track and find better too, if there is access that should.
Yeah. Great. Thank you.
The other thing to be mindful of is we have, we do so much collaboration across county departments, so, one department works with another department for this, that, or the other. And, can you or should you use email for anything that's confidential or sensitive? Like I said before, our email's secure, but what if somebody fat fingers an email and gets it sent to the wrong place? That still is not good. So again, there's other opportunities from a technology to use shared drives that are in our network within our firewall that we can use, or other ways of doing it. So again, being mindful of the technology is always going to help us think of approaches that might be more secure. So again, that's kind of also one of the things that I think could happen.
Yes.
So.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Anything else? A lot of good dialogue on that. Have there been any recent known breaches regarding anybody, identity theft in the county that you're aware of?
Not aware of
identity
any.
theft. I mean, we have HIPAA breaches. And I mean, I'm the HIPAA privacy officer, so I review those. Majority of the time, it's an email sent to a different name. And the health department does a great job of identifying them and mitigating it immediately. When it first started, when the program first started, employees were afraid of telling their supervisor and getting in trouble. And the department's done a great job of having a culture of, if you make a mistake, let us know right away so we can correct it. But I'm not aware of any identity theft recently.
I would say that there's attempts for sure. I mean, apparently every hacker out there knows when our payroll goes, because you can tell. It's almost a reminder to me when payroll starts, or the week before, because we do get a lot of requests to change your banking information, and they're not legitimate, but they figured out when our payroll cycle is. So first off, it's wrong when they're emailing me to change their direct deposit, because I don't know how to do that. So that's the first clue.
My favorite is when the commissioners email
Yes,
me and they're
always,
like,
yeah.
can you wire 50 grand? I'm like, how do you even never email me that?
Yeah.
It's like jewelry or something.
Yeah.
Jewelry from France in French. Yeah, I could not understand a thing of this. And it wasn't my husband ordered.
Well, it just goes to show you those bad actors know a lot about us. They know every single one in this room probably, and they don't hesitate to try to create an email that looks legit. So
Kind of scary. We can thank all those different algorithms out of some of that too. They stalk you, pretty scary. Okay. Anything else on data privacy? Okay, hearing nothing, let's move on to the next, the follow-up report, administrative services and risk cash handling.
So I got to do a follow-up on my very first audit, which means I've been around long enough to, check my own work or check on the progress of my work, I guess. Better way to say it. But, well, we're still waiting for the presentation.
Here it is.
Yeah, administrative services, risk management, cash handling. If you'll recall, the recommendations for this report were some fiscal controls for risk management as far as checks received, which they completed prior to the issuance of the report. And then the other piece of that was the OLCC fees and how those were being received in through admin. CDD took the point on that and grabbed the ball and ran with it. And they've now put it into their computerized procedures. It's pretty much an online application now. The only remaining piece, that 33% that's blue, is just the fee increase that has to go through our normal fee structure meetings and through the budget planning stuff. So that, once those are approved, pending board approval, that whole audit will be finished by the end of this fiscal year. So great work on the, especially I know CDD's not here, but for them to take
They're
on.
skiing.
Yeah, are they?
Yeah, if you heard this morning, Peter said, why are we having this meeting?
So for CDD to take on those OLCC fees and put them inside their permitting system and their IT staff to find creative solutions of how those approvals and workflows go through their system was a pretty big undertaking for them, and they should definitely give credit for that.
Okay,
That's all I got. It's just the one.
all right.
Any questions on that one?
Your closure rates are way better than David's now, right?
I'm not here to brag, not here to brag.
Okay. Well, we'll move on to the next item, which is any updates, county leadership recruitment changes. Nick, anything there?
I'll start out by saying that I've given the county notice of my retirement, June 30th.
Congratulations.
Uh,
So it's up to them to recruit from our choices.
Yeah, thank you, Dave. I'm glad you went first. I wanted you to do so. So we'll begin to, as you look at other positions very quickly about what those transitions look like, we need to think about what your transition looks like here very quickly. I'd like to say I've had a lot of time to think about it over the last few weeks, but I haven't. We've had some other things happening over the last couple of weeks that have gathered a lot of community attention. And so we look forward to transitioning quickly to think about your position. And I would like to talk to the chair about, do we engage members of the audit committee about replacing you? Is that the right path? I know when we added the second position some time ago, the idea was for succession planning, and there may be different thoughts about what that looks like. But as my quickly discussing with commissioners, and one of the commissioners said, well, how many FTE do we need in the auditor's office for a county and organization of our size, just given all the activities? And so just to touch base with everybody quickly before we just launch that recruitment, I think seems to make the most sense. So Darryl, it'll be great to touch base with you here in short order, as you're the chair, and the auditor reports to the audit committee, and I'm officially the internal supervisor, but it's really the audit committee and the board of county commissioners. So we'll continue those conversations, but to say that we'll miss Dave is an understatement. We'll have at least one more meeting before you leave, so we can have celebratory comments and great memories, but what you've done to create this program for the past 25 years.
21 years.
21 years.
Keeps getting longer.
I'm sure you know. Has just been extraordinary for all of us to be where we're at today. Dave, is a testament to you and the work that you've done, and commitment to the program and the county. It's really been extraordinary. I do want to just touch base on county leadership changes. So some of you are new, but I just want to capture really quickly since July of 2021. And that was when Nancy Blankenship, our clerk, retired, and Steve Dennison became the interim. So if we start there, July of 2021, we had a new county clerk. Tom Anderson retired, and I became county administrator. We hired a second deputy county administrator. We had to fill my position in the community development department. We had a new solid waste director, and we didn't hire just one, we hired two, because the first one is, as he was emerging as the candidate, said, well, by the way, I'm gonna retire in about a year and a half. So we said, great, well, we had two fantastic candidates, so we hired a second as the incoming, so solid waste director. Our health services director, the one that I've got to announce today, I just kind of capture all these, is our new IT director. Tanya Mahmood, we can mention a few comments to her pretty soon. Our new CFO, our new finance director, of course, our new district attorney, and a new community justice director. So as we think about these changes, that's 10 out of about 20 departments that we have.
Add a new treasurer to that too as well.
Well, yeah, so I was gonna go beyond, yeah, so
sorry.
I was gonna keep going.
Yeah.
So in addition to that, in addition to those are department heads. We have a new treasurer, but other changes we've had. So in our health services department, I don't think that's me. In our health services department.
Somebody hacked.
It's like.
You pick up the handle.
How do you dial out on that?
A lot of buttons.
No, that's good. It's a rotary. So I was gonna say several of those, several new department heads, as we have at least one in here, have come from the outside, the organization, but many have been internal, including our two elections of our district attorney and our county clerk, which has then created other big changes in various departments. In health services, for example, we promoted a behavioral health director, and the public health director had left. So we had both, and both of those divisions are the size of, larger actually than most all other departments. Community development director moves up, and so we have a new planning manager. So there's just the ripple effects of those internal promotions, which have been extraordinary, have also created just significant changes across the departments. And then when I think about our admin, two or three people in our front office, and thanks, Angie, we're still thrilled, we're thrilled that you are here, have turned over, which is a big change for us. Our grants coordinator, we have a new strategic initiatives manager. So going back to the health department, we also have a new medical director, a new psychiatrist, not in the health department, but has the same similar name, a new medical examiner. Just the changes that we've experienced since really July of 21 have really been significant across the organization. So just going back, our newest is our IT director, Tanya Mahmood. She was the IT director at OSU Cascades, incredibly competitive process. And she came out on top, and we're really, really pleased she's here. She started a few weeks ago, hitting the ground running, as we talked about with privacy and what we're doing with cybersecurity and all kinds of things. So Eric, Whitney, any other, the three of us are kind of in all of this together, and just any other comments or perspectives, but we've spent so much time with Kathleen, because as we go through all the department head changes and all the other changes that go down, HR is right.
We've been busy.
The four of us are really in the middle of all of it.
Payroll would like terminations to slow.
You captured it well. I mean, organizations go through times of change. And for a while, you go to the department head meeting, it's the same department heads, and it used to be Tim Shimke was the most senior department head. And then you start the change and turnover, and we've gone through a ton of it. We've done a great job of hiring, great new staff, and they've been great additions to the team. I'm hoping for a period of stability now.
Yeah.
Organizations go through a lot of change, and then hopefully smooths out for a while before there's a lot of change again. But I've been here 15 years, and the department heads I've worked with my entire career have been fantastic, and our new additions are fantastic as well.
Have you done transition audits for heads?
No, because there's been so many.
Not to give you a whole bunch, but then.
We need another person.
Incredible how much change there's been, really. When you lay it all out, it's hard to believe, but I guess it's cyclical, but there's been a lot. Hang in there, Nick.
Yeah, thank you. We're in great shape. We have a great, I couldn't be happy. Our team is just fantastic. So we are in such a great place. But of course, now we have to think about the auditor and where we go from there together. So yeah, we're so happy for Dave.
Thanks. And I will certainly be available anytime you need me to get together with you. So just let me know and we'll do that.
Thank you.
Okay, anything else?
Nothing else from me. Thank you.
Okay, let's move on to the next item, and that is the biannual, audit plan development 24-25. David, take it away.
All right, so we're about at the end of our plan, meaning Aaron and I are finding it hard to find new project. No. There's lots of projects. It's just our list that we generated for the plan is coming to a close, and we'll refresh it with another 2-year plan so that we have something to work with. Not that the plan can't get changed along the way, but it's always good to have those projects identified and go through this process. So this particular meeting is a great meeting for us to get your guys' ideas. I'm going to spend some time, we're going to talk about the process a little bit, but really at the end of this, I want to have anything the audit committee wants to bring up as far as ideas, as far as audits, or they can always email them to me, but just kind of wanted to go through the process real quickly, how we do it. So again, this process is a risk-based process. What we try to do is make sure we're hitting the big themes around the county. What are the big issues? What are the big departments? What are the big risks for the county? And why risk? Well, we have limited resources. We want to spend time in the right place. We want to make sure we have impact. No one wants to see us doing audits that everyone says, oh, well, that was great, but why didn't you look at this? You know, we want you to think that we're looking at the right places at the right time. So we kind of use a quadrant like this. This is kind of a bridge version, you know, impact probability kind of a thing, and risk, and high risk and low risk. We want to be in the quadrant where it's high risk and high impact. Granted, not all our audits are that way. Some audits might have potential to be a high risk, but you know, like our fiscal audits, we do those out of course because they can become problematic. We can have risks in departments if we don't look at things periodically. So
if I could pause real quick back on that.
Sure.
On that chart, when you refer to share in that top left, so kind of high impact but low probability, what does that mean?
Gosh, I probably stole this graph from somebody. I don't remember.
That's okay. I mean, I generally agree with the concept
Usually,
here.
from what my perspective, that's like a shared risk. You're sharing the risk over,
That's okay.
it's kind of spread out over maybe multiple departments or multiple levels. So it's somewhat acceptable. You can see the lower left is acceptable, right? It's like, okay, this is fine. I think that next step up, in my opinion, is going to be, it's like a shared risk. Like, okay, it's a little bit spread out, maybe hard to get, you know, maybe our exposure is limited because of the structure of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then that bottom right, then would be kind of, hey, looking at the control environment.
There's control environment, exactly.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, you'd have to break, you know, there have to be vulnerabilities within the control to take advantage of those.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that makes sense to me. I just wanted to see exactly what that.
So the tools I've created to do some of our risk analysis kind of goes through some themes. And I think these themes are good for you to have some understanding of, just so that you can understand where I'm viewing the county. So there are these 5 themes: strategic and management. So we'll go through what those are, but those are themes that come from management and from the department heads, from maybe themes that are going around with the county. 2, complexity of operations. Again, if there's no complexity to it, if they're, I'm trying to think of where there'd be low complexity in our environment. Maybe they just don't handle any money, or they don't have any turnover, or they don't have any compliance risks. That'd be low complexity. If they have a lot of compliance risks, they're higher risk. Fiscal risks, again, could be building buildings, could be going out for bonds, collecting large amounts of money. Community trust and confidence, that comes back to, is it hit in the paper? Is it something of concern? Are we getting a lot of feedback on something? Asset profile, again, if there's a lot of money involved, usually capital in general is, fixed assets, that's low generally, but like high cash, like maybe like the county fair or something like that, that might be a higher risk asset profile from that perspective. So again, strategic management for each of these, then I would go through and grade, is this an area of significance to our operations as a county? So, so is it a strategic element? Is it like public safety? Is it, is it something that's significant to our operations? Management input. I'm talking to 2 commissioners, and the 2 commissioners say, gosh, why aren't you looking at this particular place? If I start hearing that over and over again, I'm starting to think, oh, okay, this is high. Service alignment. Again, is the department doing what it's supposed to do? Is it doing something outside of what it normally is supposed to do? How are they aligned there? Complexity. Fund types. Everyone knows our enterprise funds are they're kind of like our for-profit thing. So again, that's on our higher list. You would have some of our funds that are maybe trust funds or something like that. It's a little lower risk. Fiduciary funds, low risk. Velocity of current changes. Again, if I'm seeing, well, go to it before, it's staff size, turnover, and I'm seeing lots of very high contracts supporting the business where maybe we're contracting out a good piece of what we do. Nature of project activity. So like building the courthouse, for doing more projects, bigger projects. Control environment, how are we set up in terms of a control environment? Is it written? Is it, everyone's very conscious of it? That kind of stuff. So that's complexity. And then fiscal, just looking at, when I first came to the county and I started doing this exercise, mine was pretty basic. It was mostly fiscal. I've added in these other themes to try to bring in the other elements of things that would create a problem. So, gross revenue, number of employees, reliance on general fund, staffing levels. You're looking at your big funds, your big dollar budgets and all that stuff. So that's fiscal. Community trust is pretty evident when it happens. I mean, when we had discord in the district attorney's office some years, that created, sorry, Steve. That was a very high community trust issue. But again, it doesn't necessarily mean anything's wrong, but things are hitting the papers. Maybe reputation, maybe we have some editorial comments about something. Public visibility, again, what's hidden today? Homelessness, should homelessness be an audit topic? Again, it's very publicly visible
Yes,
right
I'd like to
now.
have a count at China Hat. No, I can't get the number. The sheriff's office doesn't have it. The point in time, people tell me, oh, no, it's not geographically. So I'm thinking, I told, Officer Blaylock in our office, I said, well, I think we're gonna go back out again and I will take the numbers down and you guys can drive me around. I mean, really? Is that just, it's unbelievable. I cannot get a count for out there. And the Forest Service doesn't know it either. So that's 3 different groups and it's an enormous problem in Deschutes County, public safety and the vulnerability. And nobody knows how many people are there. So Dave, put it on the list and I'll sign up to do it.
I'm curious how you arrived at a 10% weighting for this category. In my mind, this is a really kind of a big deal right now. And I wonder how often do you revisit the weightings? Because I assume you have a matrix that determines whether or not you're going to audit a particular function or department based on the.
Generally, between the strategic management one and this one, usually are kind of big drivers for me, even though it says 10%. It's kind of a bigger driver than it seems like. But you're right, 10%.
Should the weighting, it feels a little light to me.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, okay.
Do they overlap though?
Yeah, there's a little overlap in some of
So
the
they could all
categories.
touch every area and then the weight
Yeah.
goes up.
So I think this really pertinent conversation, especially with David's announcement, you know, and all of the other leadership and transition changes that we've experienced. And I do wonder, I mean, I love this framework. I think this is something that, you know, maybe there are tweaks that we can talk about, percentages, and are there any other risk factors we want to think about? But is this the type of thing, and I don't know the answer, is this in the code for how the audit function is assembled?
It's not in code.
You know, I mean, I guess whether it's code or do we have policy where we want to memorialize this type of approach? And I think, you know, we benefited from the time that David has been here, established this understanding of these risks. And I think we've got common understanding around the table here. But is this a good time for us to be thinking about how do we memorialize for the next stage for whoever's coming on board? Or do we want to say, hey, whoever's coming on board has the freedom to establish a whole new methodology as they see fit? So I don't know the answer to that, but this feels like the right time to have that question. You know, how much do we want to have this defined as part of the function of this group and the audit team? I don't know if others have thoughts on whether that.
Well, this is documented in our practices. So I mean, I have a whole binder that talks about how this is accomplished and what we come up with, and then come up with a plan and all that stuff. And the plan is approved by the audit committee. So again, when we come up with a plan, the plan is what we work with to move forward with things. If there's significant alterations to the plan, we have to come back to you guys for that. So again, if you approve a plan, as I leave, and you have another auditor in here, they're gonna have to work within the confines of that plan until it gets amended.
Yeah.
And then you, of course, could have feedback on that process. So I think you guys are safe in terms of figuring out what goes on.
Yeah, I just don't want to lose.
No,
so
in
much
terms
that,
of memorialization, all this is in our policies and procedures manual, and Dave's left a fantastic, you know, trail behind him of all these written processes that he's been doing for 21 years.
Yeah.
For the next person to pick up, and yeah, so yeah, it's not going to get lost in July.
Okay, that's helpful to hear.
Yeah.
It sounds to me like it's similar to the difference between policy and operational guidelines.
Right.
So like in facilities, we have operational guidelines that are easier to amend or change, but they're still how we operate until there's an official revision of them. But they're not necessarily accounting policy at the official policy level.
Right, and this whole process of let's say risk assessing departments or functions or programs helps me identify areas to go to maybe earlier than later, but it doesn't identify the project and it doesn't identify the audit per se. So there's still some creativity in terms of trying to come up with a theme or a project. And then there's general themes that don't necessarily reside in any particular department. And if I said homelessness, where does that lie within the county? Is it health services? Is it admin? Where does that get picked up? It's not an easy one to put your finger on, just like cybersecurity. It covers everything. It doesn't have a place it sits.
Does it have to?
Doesn't have to. That's why I always try to come up with those ones that kind of come outside of what we can identify maybe through a risk assessment. It might come up through maybe conversations with management or commissioners or something like, oh, we need something here. We need to look at cybersecurity. We can look at that. Well, that's not evident from anything here, but we'll take that and say, oh, I'm hearing that twice, 3 times.
Yeah.
It brings it up. It raises it up in terms of visibility in my mind.
Yeah.
And then then when we talk through this process, you guys have ultimately ability to, I'll give you a scoreboard of sorts and a pick list. You can say, oh yeah, we don't want that, we want that, we want this, we want that. I mean, that's what it comes down to. Is, internal prioritizations. So.
And I think this framework is so helpful to be able to have that conversation, right? Is where they go, well, what should be included and how should it be prioritized? At least having the framework for that conversation is really, really useful.
And just for a little bit of kudos to David, I think it's been at least a handful of times where our peers from other counties or other agencies have called him, hey, can you talk me through your risk assessment? How does that work? How do you do it? Because there isn't a lot of guidance out there. Everybody kind of wings it.
Yeah.
It's been my experience, at least. He's got a kind of a proven method, and
I borrowed from somebody else.
yeah, but it's to go to now for this further development in other places too. So yeah, it's been pretty cool.
But then Aaron, the interesting thing is, we did not have ransom insurance in Deschutes County till I got here. And I am, you can tell, I'm not a very computer person if I'm the one who gets my credit card hacked or my checking account hacked from friends. So we didn't have it then and we got it. I know it's getting really expensive and I know it's not that effective. But then when Tillamook County was hacked, I was so glad that we actually were a bit safer, perhaps.
Sure.
I mean, through those connections, you do get resources and you get support. So it's nice to have those insurance, the process of getting that insurance. They have checklists and all that stuff, and it really kind of brings visibility to a lot of things in the departments. So just so you're aware.
Whoever comes in to fill David's big shoes, certainly appreciate the template that's been established and to be able to obviously amend that to their seeing as time goes by, but I think they'll appreciate it immensely.
Okay, thanks, Daryl. So assets profile, again, fairly low level, just kind of big high things in terms of, are they have a lot of cash, or they have a lot of activity, what kinds of diverse things do they do? So that's all put together to create kind of impact likelihood and change things. So again, try to bring a 2-year plan together. Probably the biggest piece of this is probably talking to management and trying to develop the topics. So I might say, well, okay, sheriff's office, what are we going to do with the sheriff's office? And then you go through, one of the things I do is I look at audits that are being done around the country and say, okay, well, what's relevant right now? Maybe it's body worn cameras. Is that a topic for us now? Is that something we want to do now? Or is that something that's really not creating a problem? Or do you want to get ahead of something? Do you think it might be a problem? So again, there's lots of ways to use audits. You can use them in the planning stages. You can learn do we audit a county building contract at the beginning, middle, or end? Which is more effective? All of them? You have to kind of ration yourself. Which one are you going to do? You work at the beginning of it, you're going to work in the middle of it, you're going to work at the end. You can do all three. They're going to have a different feel and they will have a different outcome. So it just depends on how you want to approach it. So again, we're going to be looking at 24-25, so fiscal year 24, fiscal year 25 plan. We're looking for areas to look at. We do have an underlying kind of underpinning fiscal audit rotation where we're trying to get to all departments on a fiscal audit once every 8 to 10 years. If everything goes right, we're well on, Aaron kicked through probably, I don't remember, 8 or so, or I don't know, quite a few fiscal audits this last.
Thanks for the credit though.
A lot of fiscal audits this last go around. So again, I think we have 3 to 4 in each year that we're going to try to do. So you'll see those in there as well. So again, now's a good time to either share some feedback or put some ideas forward, or you can email me anything any choice you have. I know some of you have more ideas than others. but feel free to shoot them out to me.
I just keep thinking about all the transition that's happening here. And the transitions that you have done audits for have been so valuable for hearing and seeing. I know a lot of those transitions have already happened. I don't know if that still has value at this point to look at some of those and see if that might be a place to look. I'm sure we've had this conversation before, but does your team also do like organizational assessments? I don't know if that overlaps with audit or if that's something completely different. Or if maybe you guys have a whole separate staff that does organizational type assessments. But I'm just thinking about all these moving pieces and all these transitions happening. Yes, it's a challenge, but it's also an incredible opportunity. And so mostly thinking for you guys, from that higher level, are there opportunities to look at how the organization is structured and processes that are happening, communication styles that could be improved or looked at? Again, I don't know if that falls into your purview.
I mean, I've done span and control things. A lot of times we've seen departments come in and they sometimes rejigger their organizational structure. And with that, I mean, I think HR is very involved and administration is very involved because they throw all kinds of things out of whack in terms of positions and structures and creating new reporting. I don't know, HR probably could talk to that better, what we have in process, but it gets vetted at the highest levels, but we don't typically, I mean, audit, usually we're looking for some kind of criteria or best practice or whatever. So we're not always asked to critique somebody's organizational change before they do it. So a lot of times we'll see the repercussions afterwards.
Right, just a thought.
Yeah.
I like that idea a lot, and I wonder too, I mean, maybe just from a resource standpoint, it's not feasible to do an audit on all the transitions, but at an organizational level, is there a way to identify the best practices to where they are or are not in place, so that whether it's a look back at where transitions have occurred or be prepared for the unknown, that's a risk that if, thankfully, we've had very peaceful transitions lately, but it's always possible that there's not going to be, or it's just going to be not necessarily peaceful, but just disruptive in the way it occurs and the amount of change that happens. So I don't know if there's a way to do that and say, hey, at least having some assessment of whether those best practices are broadly shared throughout accounting departments. Maybe that could be a light touch on a broader scope.
Okay.
I'm also thinking about, forgive me, does the county go through like a higher level goal setting process every 2 years? Every year. And every year. So in January. Yeah, so that just sounds like another opportunity of thinking about where the county is headed and whether there might be audits or assessments related to where we're at as it relates to the goals and how to push forward, or the things that are blocking, how to move forward.
Yeah, so I attend all those goal setting meetings just because of that, because I want to hear, with the same thing with the budget. I mean, you hear about a lot of the initiatives through the budget process. Because any of these reorgs or any of these big themes come with usually resources, money that's been spent, new money, new people.
Yeah, so just building on the last two, which I really appreciate the thought about the organizational structure and the goal setting and where we're going. And is there, I don't know if it's audit or maybe it's a different element, is the value of strategic planning, which we haven't done as an organization, where you are looking at the departments, you're looking at a longer term goal setting process where the annual goals that fit into that, and then how we're all buying into the same direction where the county's going. I don't know if there's great to understand if there's an audit, there's some place about how that.
Go for audit. Generally audit's looking backwards, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, visioning is always an interesting thing. You know, think of the vision of
Yeah.
where we want to be in 10 years.
For 5, yeah.
Or 5.
Yeah.
That, I mean, that's probably more leadership, more stuff like that, but
Yeah,
I'm also mindful of what.
that's right. It is kind of looking back to see how's it been working, but is there a better way to do it?
Right.
Because since we have the recommendations on where do we go from here?
And with their background and just understanding of every nook and cranny of the county.
Yeah.
Could be a very valuable resource.
Yeah.
And it's definitely economically changing now because our solid waste numbers have gone down. Our CDD numbers are going down. They've already cut employees, and our room tax revenue numbers, that number is dropping down too. So, you know, we had all that extra COVID money coming in, and you know, if you look at our financials, you see how our positions have improved, and yet we are seeing, you know, we're seeing change now. It's definitely there. And it sure would be nice if we get the 25 million for our courthouse expansion. So that's how my wish.
Just throwing that out there.
Yeah, just, well, if more people are thinking how positive it is, because Clackamas County got 94.5 million for their courthouse. Now, just because Deschutes County is in a better position than maybe other counties, we still should get some help with funding. So we'll see. You know,
David,
positive
when
thoughts,
do you,
right?
when do you need to have your plan in place? Is that plan should be in place by June 30th or how much time?
We look for approval in the next audit committee meeting in June. So.
Yeah, you have an interesting situation here where you obviously have great feedback for the next 2 years, but whoever your successor is as well, it'd be nice, and I don't know what that timing might look like, but it'd be nice to be able to incorporate some of that feedback into whatever this plan looks like going forward. Anyway, again, I believe it's a great opportunity for the county to kind of revisit what we're doing in this area, and are there misses, other opportunities that we haven't considered?
Can I ask a process question?
Sure.
Well, I see it's 2 years. Is there room to do a 1-year transition, and then a second year with the new David Givens?
Yeah, I mean, it could, the reason I do 2 years was purely because it's a time commitment to put a plan together and all that stuff administratively. So, I mean, if the group wants a 1 year and then figures they'll come back and do another 1 year, I mean, or we could set the 2-year plan and you can come back after 1 year and revisit it. I mean, either way, it's all up to you guys. I mean, I think what I wanted to do was just leave something where we can make sure that Aaron still has a couple of projects to keep working on. And hopefully, you know, if we have a replacement by the time I leave, then I can transition that in. Yeah, see how that goes.
And we've got leeway, right? If we stick with the normal like 2-year planning cycle, we could later this year, after the new auditor comes into place, we could probably still revisit it and say, hey, based on what you're seeing now, as you kind of settle into this role, are there any significant changes? And then we as a committee can, I think we've got that leeway to revisit it and reprioritize it. Is that fair to say that if we establish it at next meeting, we could amend it later on?
It's a plan, it's like a budget.
It's
Budget
just
to be
a
changed,
budget.
that can change, just a budget. So, yeah, no, it could be modified, so. Granted, once we start a project, it's harder to pull the reins back on that, but, so it's good to have, I mean, part of the plan is to talk a little bit about timing. When are things going to be next looked at? And so we always kind of balance that with departments and their timing and things like that. I don't want to, you know, maybe I just finished something, or maybe it's like finance and they just got through their fiscal audit and they're overwhelmed and I don't want to start another audit after that. So there's timing consequences for some things. So some departments say, no, sorry, you can't have me till X, you know, I can't go into the assessor's office in the middle of them developing the tax roll. Just won't work. So, yeah.
I don't know if this makes sense, but regarding the pandemic and all of the energy and effort and process that was put into dealing with that, now that we're coming out of it, or that we're most of the way out of it, is there anything we need to look at as far as managing that process?
I'll write it down. I mean, we're doing a COOP assessment right now, which is pretty cool. that'll help a little bit.
Is there anything specifically, Daryl, with that, like return to work or?
Federal funds that were received and, public health had processes that they were doing. And now that that's all been, it's done, well, I don't know if it's over, but it's down. Is there, as a result of that, is there processes that are being done that need to be looked at or reviewed? I'm not sure what they are. It just seems like there would be something. Can't put my finger on anything specifically, but just have a feeling that there are things that need to be done or needed to be done, maybe, or need to be done. Time.
Where is the county at with disaster planning?
Huh?
Is that an area that might be helpful to look at?
From a department level, I've been really impressed with where we're at. So we're updating our continuity of operations plans right now. It'll be the second update that I've been through in 7 years. And we have a full-time emergency manager and staff. And they're regularly involved in planning, and it kind of gets exercised every summer with fire season. So they flex their muscles every year with small emergencies. And so there's a lot of exercise that goes on throughout the year.
And I think about that, but I also think about more like internal disasters, like your server room breaks down or
So I'm doing a continuity.
Nick takes off.
Yeah, so I'm right in the middle of a continuity of operations plan, which I think is exactly what you're speaking to, is how do we mitigate those small disruptions and keep service going during those, and then how do we resume our day-to-day once the crisis is over? That's exactly what continuity plans are, and I'm literally right in the middle, so, yeah.
But I think you really hit on the point, because one of the transitions I completely forgot to mention is we have a new county forester. Last August, both our county forester and our fire adaptive communities coordinator both left within a couple of months of each other. So they're both new. They're both rapidly learning this program, and all of the grants and all the fire wise and the fire free and the new state wildfire mitigation. There's just a lot there. So is there something we can engage the county forester and in that office and or Joe Stutler to say, is there something here that we should take a look at? With that transition, I just don't know, because Whitney and I were in the process of working with Ed Keith as he gave us a 2-week notice, our county forester, okay, how do we quickly download all of these grants, and there's all these projects, and it's one of these offices where so much of the work is contracted out. And so anyway, it was quite a transition. So that's a great point. That was a huge transition I forgot about this past year.
And you're right, all departments have some pretty critical processes and stuff involved, and sometimes it also comes down to just one person. And how do you identify some of those critical processes? So if a transition is quick or not as, cordial, I guess, as some of them could be. I'm in that process right now. I've accepted another position and I'm a department of one, so I'm like huge risk management concern. But thinking of all the things that I know and all the things that I do and trying to document them, logins, IT's gotten so much more complicated, 2-factor authentication and stuff, where I have to get a text message on my phone. How do you even get people signed up with systems that they have to validate, where they lived 10 years ago and stuff? Redundancy built in, it's the succession planning for those critical operations.
Sounds to me like that succession planning thing,
Yeah, and succession planning is so easy to think about people in that regard, but I think what we're talking about here is the process that.
Access.
Well, there was a tool I've given every elected that I've worked with, and I don't know. Yeah, I think you gave it to Stephen too. It's just basically a little Excel spreadsheet that helps you identify all the projects that are in limbo and how you're going to coordinate those, and who are the contacts, and what kinds of major things happen when, monthly, weekly, quarterly, that's been good for them. I think it's also been good as a bridging document to make sure people are talking about those things and how they're going to hand off those informations. That works much better when you have ability to hand off the information, but even if you can write it down and that can be shared with somebody, it makes a huge difference for most people, so. Okay, you had another one?
Yeah, the other one I think about is this last fall, we created our coordinated houseless response office. I think they're finally getting up and running now. They're about to get a ton of money via COIC from the government, from the state. And I think about not something to do early in the year, but something maybe mid-year, something a year from now at the very earliest as we look back to just the operations. They're, how's it working?
Gone? Yeah.
Yeah, how's it gone? With 14 to 14.5 million coming into COIC, how does the whole system and process work? And it's kind of a tricky one because the employee is ours, the employees will be ours, the equipment, but it's a joint office with the city. So it's just an interesting dynamic, but that could be a really important one for the office to see how it's operating, functioning, performing.
I made sure that there was an audit clause in that formation.
Thank you.
So, yeah,
Good.
so.
Okay, I'm just gonna lob one more thing out there, since this is what I do, I just brainstorm.
Yeah.
Thoughts about, this may be lower risk, but thoughts about everything that comes out of the legislature on that cycle. And so I know department heads are responsible for following and grabbing onto the ones they're responsible for, but is there a value to having internal audit look back to make sure those are being taken care of?
And I think that speaks to the comment earlier about, how do we manage any change, whether it's state or federal regulation or law? What's that change management process to identify and address those changing requirements? It's a great one.
I think part of where I'm coming from is I know counties are by nature very siloed, right? And so there are definitely audits that we can do within those silos, but then also looking at the broader topics, which you guys do. Okay. For now.
Are you sure?
No, of course you're not.
Whitney, I just have a question from the legislative affairs team. Is there a tracker for, we track all the laws that are in, but even of the ones that get passed, wondering how that would translate to
Yeah.
at least having the data that an audit committee would look at.
Yeah, a couple years ago, we started using Bill Tracker, which is a software that we use to manage our legislative affairs program. So we have bills that we track and monitor throughout the session, and then we're able to run those reports. So we could easily just download the last couple of years of reports. I will say the legislative process, because of the way, I think for a county especially, we're very engaged on the legislative front. And so I think through our legislative process, departments usually are aware of impacts that may come to them and are monitoring them for a good, couple months at least. So I think in terms of them turning around and implementing a change in state law, I think we have a pretty good grasp on what's coming our way, and also really benefit from the engagement that the Association of Oregon Counties has. And so kind of through those two channels, I think we do a good job of kind of keeping tabs on potential impacts to the county, but certainly it would be interesting to see if there's gaps in that process or ways that we could improve sort of implementation of change in state law that impacts our operations.
That's where the risk assessment comes in, right? Maybe the processes are solid, we're not worried about it. So.
Jody, anything? You were excited about getting ideas last meeting, I remember.
Yes, I have to remember what it was. I got it.
She's looking for a new job.
Yes. Lots of spinning in my head right now, yes.
Any management team, any questions?
I have notes, but I'll follow up with you.
Kathleen says, not me. No, I know, I'm like, I'm just not gonna job for like the first year.
No, I don't have any at the moment, but you're making me think, which is, I'm a digester and will probably follow as well.
Well, again, I make appointments with most of the key leadership and definitely with commissioners and most of the departments I reach out to. So
But again, not all departments are forthcoming saying, yeah, come audit me with X, you know. Some do, some actually do, which is good, but. Anyhow. Any other thoughts, any other suggestions?
Anything else? Anything land use related based on the county's growth recently? Any, like general plan updates, specific plan updates, anything like that that need to be looked at? Maybe not.
It's ongoing right now.
Okay.
Yeah, we might get our ADU bill, but I'm not getting my 330 single wide manufactured homes right out of the UGB and about then. So don't ask me about that. Workforce housing.
Okay.
I couldn't get a hearing.
David, as far as mails for ideas and that, any particular time you want those by, or you need those by, or?
I mean, probably if I could get those within the next couple weeks would be great. Well, it's still fresh in your mind. Again, I think we will work through, we have kind of March, April, and May to kind of pull it together. So have plenty of time, but it's earlier is always better, just to get it in my kind of head where people are having concerns or things, questions.
And then if you had like a draft at some point in time, cool to send it out to us, we can look at it, maybe it will generate some additional ideas.
Yeah, I could do that.
Might help. Anything else? Does anyone need a break? I'm good, but does anyone need to take 5, take 10 to speak now?
What do we have on the agenda?
Not much.
Yeah, we're less than 30 minutes.
Okay, let's just press on then.
That's on.
Okay, let's go to the next item. Internal audit recommendation database and power. Looks like BI.
It is BI. No, no,
No, you just need
no
to-
sharing. Yeah,
No sharing.
here I'll drive. Drive.
Let's just get this back to. All right, so recommendation database. So I've, over the course of working over the many years, there's been a number of things that have thought of that would make life easier for myself and for management. And one of them is kind of maximizing the utility of all the information I've created in terms of recommendations, follow-ups. Some of that is in the form of what's still open, maybe the metrics that I keep on implementations. What would the departments want to know in terms of their status, in terms of what kinds of things are open still with my department? And I've seen, I'm not the only one that's doing this. There's other departments, other functions in other places across the state and the country that I've seen really cool dashboards for that kind of have encapsulated some of the things I wanted to see. The hurdles has been trying to get all the data kind of all aligned, in a place, getting it all usable in one database. And I originally started some Excel databases to kind of start the process. But we have over 100 reports, 1,200 recommendations since I've been here. And each recommendation might have one or more follow-up responses to. So you start adding that up, it starts to get kind of big. It wasn't until I discussed it with Aaron that I was able to kind of offload this to Aaron and let him do some magic. And so Aaron's gonna talk about his magic. It's all about Aaron. So
No. So what you're seeing here is a Microsoft product called Power BI. It basically just takes all your underlying data, which thankfully Dave is a data nerd and keeps everything. And so we have data in droves, and it's just getting it to a place where it's then able to be visualized. data, what Power BI does is does a great job of visualizing data and in a way that can compare maybe data that's housed in very separate areas, but in different ways that maybe you hadn't thought of before. So how this kind of works, I'll show you kind of the underpinnings. And if I get it to the right, zoom in. Anyways, so we have kind of 7 key tables of data that we're using. And all these little lines right here are basically the relationships that we defined through in here. So that is how the program can drag data from one table to the other and then compare them against each other in ways that maybe we hadn't thought of before. So that's kind of the underpinning, it's kind of the foundational level of it. We also created a template work plan. The work plans are sent out to each audited entity, each person that usually provides comment. It's basically an Excel spreadsheet that has the recommendations and the comments. And then that's the initial work plan is sent out to them. And then 9 months later, we ask for them to update that same deal with a follow-up to update the status of each recommendation. And what Power BI does, it's really cool, is once you have a nice solid template of what that work plan looks like, you basically, all you have to do is drag it into a folder and it just auto-populates into there and all you have to do is refresh the data and it's already visualized. So it's pretty awesome that way. The other way that it's kind of awesome is that you can pick and highlight certain things. So if we look at different years across here, we can, like Dave had a really busy year this year. He got 10 audits out with nearly 120 recommendations. You can see that there was some disagreement here on some of them, but we worked through them. Anyways, it's pretty neat. So up here we have the the total audits that were in this. Some of these aren't captured. Some of them earlier ones didn't follow kind of a standardized formatting, so they weren't able to be captured. So there was some early work that Dave did that isn't in here. Again, his count is over 1,200 and it's not quite that within our database, but very close. And here's a drop down so you can filter these by department. We'll pick on Steve since he's not here. So here's the audits that have been done on the clerk's office. You can see there's been 2, one done in 2021, one done in 2008. I think if my eyes are helping me, and we can also see which one of those are still underway. And then if you hover over this, then you have the current commentary on that recommendation and the date that commentary was gathered. So it kind of gives us a running current status for these things, which is very, very helpful when it comes time to do our global follow-ups, where we reach back out to anything that hasn't been done yet.
Can I ask, did you say this is available externally or?
This is
not yet?
not externally available yet, not yet.
I was just thinking about the transitions. I mean, when I became a new department head, I didn't know of audit findings that were out there that I needed to be working on, in my inbox one day. So I just think that as we talk about that kind of transition with all these new department leaders, this is a pretty slick tool.
Yeah, the hope is to open this up to where departments can actually pick their own department out and see how.
Get a reminder.
Yeah.
I mean, with our new IT director, one of the first things we asked her to do was look at audits that pertain to IT and also scope her existing open audit recommendations, but this will certainly be a more expedient way for her.
Right,
That happened to me too. First month, I got, here's all of your outstanding audits.
Yeah.
Get to figure it out.
Welcome to the county.
So I'm sorry, I missed the premise of all of this. Is this, did you develop this tool, or this is a tool you're looking at purchasing, or?
No, we developed it on our data.
All right.
Yeah, so this is just part of Microsoft's 365 suite of products, right? There, I mean,
Oh,
it's-
okay.
there is a lot of power in all the things that are Office 365. This is just one tiny piece of it.
The
It
Power BI,
basically,
is that
You
the
can
BI?
download it free.
it basically takes any Excel data and puts it into a visualization. It can also go out to any website that has a table, and it can pull down data from a website and add that into your information that you can then shift. We watched a presentation that Microsoft did for the UN, where they took basically the UN data and visualized it. And they found a correlation between access to electricity and GDP, which hadn't been thought of, which is kind of intuitive, but it really wasn't. But they were able to visualize it in a way that others hadn't thought of. So Power BI is very cool that way. Here's our internal dashboard that we created more for just us. It, again, broken down by department here on the left as far as the amount of recommendations that have been issued in each department. We've got our survey results. Thank you to those who helped me with the DA. New streamlined version. I got some good results from that. Appreciate it. Here you see our budget to actuals. Dave has been keeping track of his hours since day one. So those are our actual budget to actuals. And here's our lifetime implementation rate. I'll use the slider because that implementation rate isn't really a true reflection, because those are actually of the brand new audit. So DA's transition, treasurer transition, those are reflected there. But if we drag it back, say a year, that's more accurate. And if you drag it back even further, it only gets better and better. Another cool thing that you can do here is you can see, you can just highlight some of these and just see which departments still have some outstanding work to be done.
Yeah.
See,
Not looking at that.
That's not
Right, there you go.
Yeah.
But that is the beauty of something like this, you know, for each of the departments to be able to access on their own, to be able to see it.
Yeah.
This is something we use extensively.
So if Road wants to come in here and see, okay, what have we done at Road? Here's all the road audits that have been done. You know, here we have, they've all been completed. You know, we had a, what is that, 92% survey results, which is great. We were under hours on all, you know, for the total of these 5 audits. So they did a great job forecasting. Time spent on that. Another cool little trick that I'll show you. It's got this really neat forecasting tool. So we can, it'll forecast out what, if you have any trend data like that, it'll give you a forecast with some kind of minimum limits.
We're trending down
to it. Well, we need some help. We need some help for our survey results. But I do. And then the last little piece I'll share is this implementation rate, this 68% that was shared in our audit accomplishments report last audit meeting for kind of our 3-year implementation rate. This basically simplifies that instead of having to go through and remember which audits we did and what, you know, judge what was completed, what wasn't. This, all we have to do is literally pick and choose which ones we've done, and it automatically calculates for us. So it saves us some math. And does a better job of capturing actual. So anyways, that's our, this is Dave's vision that I was able to realize. And we're pretty happy with it. There's still some refinement there. I mean, I think there's still some other features, or sharing it. There's some potential to share it with departments and opportunities to. I mean, sky's the limit with 365. I mean, it's a pretty cool. It's a pretty cool platform that does a lot of things within it very well. So I mean, we could drag polling results into it. We could hopefully eventually maybe get on the fly comments, you know, as people are completing things, they can just drag their completions in and it'll automatically populate, and we've kind of been brainstorming how we're gonna use this and apply it. The foundations.
Again, I think it's a resource that other departments are going to start to use. Some departments use it more than others. Health services is a big Power BI user. Finance uses Power BI. We need to get HR on.
We dabbled and then we recoiled.
Yeah, there's a lot that can be done on this. This is really cool stuff.
You got another recruitment to initiate.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, anything else on that?
Thank you for
Yellow
the
Book
review.
ethics independent. Oh, it's, Aaron, you're still like the yellow.
Yeah, it's still me. Let me share my screen with you here, Daryl. Yeah, you can see that right, Daryl?
Can, yes.
Okay, perfect, thank you.
Thank you.
So anyways, we'll happy to keep informing the committee on now we've pivoted from policy and fiscal policy to now and internal controls within the county to now what are our standards for our offices. Last meeting, we talked a little bit about equity and how that new component of equity is fitting into our kind of top of mind about our audit process. Today, we'll get kind of into the weeds a little bit with our standards. We're going to go through just some general standards. Hopefully it won't be too monotonous.
What does that stand for?
Yeah, I guess it's generally accepted government auditing standards. Yeah, yeah.
Just rolls off the tongue.
Just rolls off the tongue. I should have probably just put yellow book. I mean, yellow book is a little bit more user friendly, but you know, yeah, so yellow book is what it is, yeah. So we'll go through the folks that use GAGS or Yellow Book, what compliance elements are within the Yellow Book standards, and then just some of the key principles that reinforce good audit practice. Come on, mouse, there we go. So who are our users? You know, CPA, contract auditors, Moss Adams, anybody that audits our financials. Federal inspectors general at DOJ. Come on, mouse. I am lagging behind here. The software is not liking there we go. So agency internal auditors, you're talking GOA, their state auditors, of course, our Secretary of State's office, and then of course us. Municipal level. Compliance with GAGS, anybody that's familiar with regulation and compliance piece or standards, you know, there's our musts and our shoulds. You know, musts we have to follow, shoulds is strongly encouraged. For example, when planning performance auditors must adequately plan the work necessary to address the audit objectives. Sounds fairly straightforward. But in planning performance auditors should assess the significance and audit risk, right? So it's not a requirement, but it is best practice. So how do we document our compliance? You're all probably familiar with this little paragraph that you'll probably all skip over in our reports, where we conducted this audit with generally accepted government auditing standards, our GAGS.
Thank you.
Yes, and that we use those standards to plan and perform our audit and provide our evidence provides a reasonable basis for our findings. So again, we talked about equity in our last one. Ethics was one of our other 5 E's. As public employees, we're all bound by Oregon ethics law. But as auditors, we also have our principles within our standards. The CPAs in the room know that there's additional higher standards for CPAs, training, continuing education of ethics. Those 5 principles there, pretty logical and straightforward, but those would be our guidance. So auditor independence. This is starting to touch on some fundamental elements of our audit work. those of you in the room are probably most familiar with Arthur Andersen and that firm's impact. This is just a touch on, this is public sector. And one of the things that impacted Arthur Andersen, their weekly billings of one company were $1 million a week that they were able to do. So any impact to independence there when you have $1 million coming in every week? Probably some Scrooge McDuck money going on there. But when it all fell apart, I heard somebody whisper it. Yeah, it did not go well. The independence and lack thereof was felt by not only Arthur Andersen, but Enron in public. So independence, we'll talk about some of the interrelated sections of independence. So we have independence of mind, right? We want to stay free of bias and keep our objectivity, but we also want to have independence in appearance, not just the costumes we're wearing, but if an outside observer believes that we're not being objective or our integrity's been compromised. Conceptual framework, I'll touch on that and show you kind of what that looks like. Non-audit services, we'll talk about what those are going to be, and documentation, we'll touch on that a little bit as well. But first, what are some of the threats to independence, right? Self-interest, right? Our Arthur Andersen example, financial interest that's unduly influences our judgment. Self-review, if we provided non-audit service or we were just hired from a department, you know, if I just came from health services to go re-audit health services, I might have some bias there, right? I might not be objective. Speaking of bias, you know, there's a lot of strongly held beliefs out there that might sway our judgment. We might have some implicit bias going in. Familiarity, right? We might have a family member or a close relationship with somebody that we are auditing. Undue influence. Somebody may be whispering in our ear that our budget is tied to this audit and it better go the right way, right? Management participation. If we go over the line and start making decisions for management, that is a threat to our independence. We have too much buy-in. And then there's a structural threat, organizational placement. Some places where the internal auditors, right under the CFO or in the treasurer's office, it's organizational threat. Here's a little bit of the conceptual framework that I talked about. I wish it was more easy to see. My intent was to kind of walk you through some of these boxes, but it's very small print and I can hardly see it from here. So up in the upper left, basically we as auditors have to evaluate if there are any threats in this audit objective, an audit topic. If there's not, we drop straight down to proceed. All ships go. But if we think there might be one, then we shift to the right and we start thinking about, well, is this threat based on a non-audit service? So what the heck is a non-audit service? Well, non-audit service could be things like providing information to management, collaboration with other entities, other professional organizations, contracting audit services on the behalf of the entity, right? That sounds familiar, Moss Adams. Follow-up reports, those are non-audit services, investigations of fraud. But where are the threats within these non-audit services? That's what the key is. We go over the line, could lead to familiarity with our auditee, could be a management participation. Maybe we unintentionally made a decision. Could be a bias in there. Again, we have to always think independence of mind, independence in appearance. So back to our framework, we've identified, nope, it was only because I just worked at health services. I don't have any of those. I didn't provide any non-audit service to them. So down in the middle, if you could see it, it was, then we have to think about safeguards. How are we going to safeguard this audit so that we ensure that there's an objectivity there and we're independent? So what are the safeguards? We could employ a third party to do the audit. They should be impartial. We could have another auditor who wasn't on the team review our audit work to determine if we were independent. Or we could just remove the auditor altogether, or just not do the audit. We could burn it completely. Once again, we go back to our framework. If I can read it. Over here on the third column, if it was a non-audit service, there's a few more questions to be asked there. Does management have a reasonable knowledge and experience to oversee the audit, non-audit service? And if so, is a written agreement met? Those are all things that I think were within our code. Correct me if I'm wrong, for non-audit service. And if so, then we document those non-audit services to maintain our independence. But if we had to employ one of these safeguards, there's a documentation element to that as well. So we document our what the threats that were identified, the significance of those threats, what we use to safeguard them. And in the case if it was non-audit, the management's ability to oversee and the understanding document that went along with that. Again, this is a should prepare appropriate documentation for this. It's not a must, interestingly enough, but again, best practice.
So one of the things we did when I got involved with the Munis implementation was I was tasked with it, and the audit committee approved my participation with it, but I was just one of many people involved with the implementation. But since I was offering guidance and input, I had management at the time sign off that I was going to do it and that I was just a participatory, and that ultimately the decisions were made by finance and administration. So that I could protect myself from, because I knew I was going to end up auditing this down the road. So wanted to make sure I was clear of any threats or perceived threats from that. So that's where this comes in. It doesn't come in very often, but for some things like this, it can.
And this is something we do for every single audit. We at the beginning of our process or planning, we self-review any threats that could be perceived or otherwise known. And so we talked a lot about judgment. So what makes up our professional judgment? Well, it's our knowledge, it's our skills, it's our experience, it's our integrity. Two key pieces are reasonable care, right? In planning, we try to understand the unique nature of our auditees. Performing it, we obtain sufficient appropriate evidence. And evaluation, we consider the significance and relevance of each of our meeting our objectives. And professional skepticism, we're critically assessing our evidence all the time, being always consideration of fraud. That skepticism piece is kind of foundational to the audit. That's it. Any questions, comments on our first three sections of Yellow Book? General standards?
Anything?
I think when you ask your question, like how is his plan and what he's established are going to stay in place, it's hiring somebody that knows GAGAS and is going to follow it.
Yeah.
So that's going to be like a really important part. Or
So that's in our code that the county internal auditors select professional standards to follow. I didn't push people towards one or the other, but Yellow Book is the primary one for governmental. The other one would be Red Book, which is the IIA standards. So, both are good, both can work, but they should follow standards because I think that leads to professionalism and kind of holding yourself accountable.
Really great connection, and thank you for sharing this. I mean, these are principles that I think we all appreciate, but it's always great to be reminded of it, so we've all got the same expectations.
Sure. No, the whole thing is just to continue education, whether it's the county or our office.
Okay, update other items.
Okay. So on the back of your agendas are a bunch of different things, including future dates. What I will also bring your attention to is your appointment dates for those that are on the committee. We have a couple people. We have Jody, Scott, Summer, and Charles that are coming up for their term renewals if they want to renew. That's June 2023. So if you are not going to, so you don't want to continue, let me know. It will help us plan for a recruitment if we do. So.
David? Well, I'm unlikely, I'm still mulling it over, just trying to make sure I'm balancing kind of my focus and energy, but yeah, unlikely to be.
Okay. Summer, do we have any idea yet, or you're good? Jody, are you good? Okay, great. Yes, Daryl?
The items on the list, ALGA award, audits and follow-ups.
So the ALGA Award is my professional association. They gave me a Lifetime Achievement Award. So
I saw that, yeah, very good.
So that comes with them paying for my conference and my travel and my trip to Baltimore, Maryland. So it's
When's the conference?
it's in May.
That should be.
Very cool.
That should be nice.
It shouldn't be too bad.
Yeah, should get a crown.
They better have a crown. If they don't have one, I'll bring one.
You don't get a crown.
I won't be wearing it.
That's great.
Audits that we're doing right now. So right now we're working with health services, finishing up some finance tax, audit, continuity of operations plan. So we got quite a bit we're kind of working on right now. Trying to get 2 audits into report stage and 1 into kind of work. I'll bring up the internal audit status report. And then probably the only other thing is we have our internal audit status report. One thing we'll show you here is that pretty typical. One of the things I just tweaked is on the second page, which is a comparison, 12-month running average compared to where we are over this last 2 months. And it's pretty much running in line. It's not, we have stronger audit time than we do administrative time, which is a good positive. So giving you some perspective as to, you know, what a year looks like versus what we're running at for the last 2 months is kind of a good thing. So
David, given your news,
yeah,
are there things that are on the audit plan for the next 6 months that maybe we need to push back so that you guys have time to transition?
well, I mean, I think there's things, I just started an audit that I hope to complete by the time I leave. There are a couple of other audits, I'd say, you know, a lot of them probably Aaron's gonna take on.
There's a fiscal audit, which I've been basically running with.
And a computerized audit, which he's done already too, so.
The work that we have left that's on our prior 2-year audit plan is easily within my wheelhouse. Yeah, no worries there.
Yeah, and then the work plan assessment and all that kind of stuff, and then any work to onboard or deal with that succession stuff, that's should have time. Yeah. So
I just don't want you to kill yourself.
hey, I'm sure term they keep saying so.
We're gonna start seeing that.
But I don't think, yeah, I don't have that mindset, so. Anyhow, so yeah, so this is our status report. Any other questions or closing business? Any other items people want to bring up?
Email David regarding the work plan ideas within the next couple of weeks, hopefully. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I'll send a tickler out. How's that?
Yeah, that'll help. Yeah. Okay. Anything else for the cause? Hearing none, adjourn at 2:29.
Thanks, Darren.
Thank
you. Thanks, Cheryl.
Next meeting's in June 9th.
See you, everybody.